Hello, my friend, and welcome to TFU News and Views. I am your host, Anthony Brucali, owner, operator, madman behind TFU.INFO, the website, the archive, the Twitter account, Transformers University podcast, this podcast, and oh so much more. I want to welcome you to episode number 54 of TFU News and Views. And this time around, we're talking about Legacy, Transformers Legacy, Wave 2 mainly, the Hasbro fan site roundtable I was a part of last week, and the questions asked there, my thoughts to Wave 2, and for our Patreon subscribers, those at the junior level and up, going to do some exclusive content for you of my thoughts on Wave 1 of Transformers Legacy, as Hasbro was kind enough to send me some free product. So we're going to talk a little bit about what they sent and my thoughts on those figures. But first, let's talk about the thing that's on everyone's mind. All the reveals from Fan First Tuesday of Legacy Wave 2, all the questions and answers from the Q&A session, and of course, Titan, Cybertron Universe, Metroplex. Now, the roundtable, I want to talk a little bit about these roundtables because they're an interesting combination of fan interaction, press interaction, and Q&A. You know, I've done these a couple of times now. We've done these actually for several years now when you go pre-pandemic, and the conversations we would have with Hasbro at events such as New York Toy Fair and New York Comic-Con. These conversations, they're interesting because there's a lot of people in them. Aside from 3 designers and 2 marketing people and, you know, the folks from the PR company that Hasbro hires, I was trying to keep track. I think there's about 16 or 17 of us from various websites, podcasts, influencers, YouTubers, from mostly in North America. One guy did have a British accent who I don't really know him, but let's just say that he is somewhere on Earth, and we get the opportunity to really discuss these sorts of things with Hasbro and kind of pick their brains and pick the designers' brains. And the designers are awesome. Mark and Evan and Sam, they are so much fun to talk to. They give such great insights into their thinking. And then you have Rachel and Ben from the marketing team who gives us a little bit of insights into the business side of things and also into the background side of things, the story side of things. And that actually will take us to the first question. But before I do, I want to let you know, the questions were limited to Legacy Wave 2 and the Cybertron Metroplex reveal. So basically the things that had been announced in the previous week leading up to this call. This is something that gets laid out when we get told about the call. So if you're wondering why we didn't get asked about, no one really asked about studio series, or no one asked about any sort of TV show tie-in or anything sort of along those lines, we are given very explicit direction as to what the topics are going to be for the conversation, and they are reiterated at the top of the conversation by the PR team. So just keep that in mind in terms of what we talk about with these folks. Now, the first question that came out came from Jack at T-Formers, and he had questions about characters and how they fit into various universes because of the way they're labeled on packages. So like Laser Prime is labeled, or actually G-Axis is labeled as Generation 2 universe, or Metroplex is labeled as Cybertron universe, which is weird because he's part of the Unicron trilogy. So that's its own universe. And I don't think the marketing team quite got the question. And so the answer was a little bit roundabout, basically saying how Legacy was its own thing and they were going to pull from different universes, and that figures end up in other things such as Buzzworthy or Selects. The really interesting thing we did get out of this answer wasn't necessarily related to the question, but was related to something Hasbro does called the capsule programs. Now, the capsule programs, such as the Netflix series for Walmart or the Buzzworthy series for Target, these are essentially separate toy lines done for those specific vendors, those specific retailers. So it's interesting to see that on its own. laid out there for us. I don't think the brand team has a good grasp on the notion of universes the way we do, or way many fans do, based off of how TF Wiki kind of has built this realm of, this is a G1 universe, and this is kind of that sub pocket of a G1 universe, and Unicron trilogy exists over here. And you take this all the way back to Chris McFeely's first episode of Transformers: The Basics on YouTube, because he kind of lays out where the universe lines are kind of drawn, and there's basically like 7 different universes, right? And everything else is a subsect of that. I think they take some of those subsects and build them out as their own universe. So like, yeah, you can say G2 universe, and in some instances, yeah, G2 happened in a very specific way in the comics. It happened in a fairly specific way on the toy packaging. It didn't happen in a cartoon unless you want to count the Space Cube. So those things all kind of exist on their own within the context of G1. But, someone like me will be like, but G2 is G1, just like Beast Wars is G1, right? But some people will say Beast Wars is its own universe. I don't know if Tarantulas is actually labeled Beast Wars Universe. I haven't really looked closely at that. But again, that would be one of those things like, well, not exactly. I think for Hasbro and their marketing and how they're laying this out, they're trying to lay out these universes. I think they've got a firm grasp that G1 is G1, and then Prime is Prime, and then all the other ones are kind of fuzzy in a lot of ways. And so, having Cybertron Universe Metroplex doesn't mean it's Unicron Trilogy Metroplex to them, right? It means it exists in the previous Cybertron line. It's a weird way to put it for us, but I think for them as marketers, it's the simplest way to put it, that they're not trying to sell Optimus Prime, G2 Optimus Prime, Laser Prime as the original. This is one from a different era that you may not know. And then when you simplify it to those terms, it makes a little more sense. Second question came from the folks at Awesome Toy Blog, asking about limbs, Combiner limbs being split into different waves. This is really nothing new. This happened in Combiner Wars as well. And I think it's to get people to keep coming back to the store, right? So you might be trying to build Menasor, but if you go to the store once and buy all 5 figures, right, you're done. You're not going back. You're not buying that, you know what, I kind of like that figure. Maybe I'll pick this one up too. So the folks that are just dead set on buying Menasor, they're just going to buy Menasor regardless. But folks who might want to buy Menasor and might be talked into something else, it's smart business. It's smart marketing. Look, for Hasbro, they want to keep dipping into your pocket. That's their job as a business, and for them to split these across waves only makes sense. Now they did say, and this is another thing that I think came up in the conversation that I thought was more interesting than the question, is that box sets were not off the table. That they did box sets in Combiner Wars. And actually, they mentioned Devastator as an example, which I thought was a weird choice, given how it doesn't really combine the same way. And it was only available as a box set. But with that in mind, they're still going, or at least thinking about finding ways to do box sets. And I think if you wanted this in a G2 style, because that's the natural retool and recolor for this set of figures, I'm all for it. The people who are like, oh, Doom the Masquerade, that one still irks me that people keep asking for it. Because I when I was really young in the fandom, in the mid-90s, I thought the same thing. That'd be really cool. And then when you think about it, you're like, no, it's a terrible idea. One of those cars is Wind Charger, which puts him way out of scale with the rest of the group, or you have a much larger Wind Charger than you would want. And 2, they never show up in their Autobot colors as the Stunticons. They never show up in their Autobot colors as Menasor. And so unless that figure looks really cool, which, hey, it might, and that'd be really cool to do just as like an offshoot of the project, I have a hard time being like, this needs to be done. There's so many cooler things that need to be done, i.e. Killing Jar Ultra Magnus, or Killing Jar Everybody box set. That's one I'm in for. But Masquerade Stunticons doesn't do it for me, but that's just my personal taste. All right. Jeremy, my buddy from Transmissions, he asked about yellowing on recent figures, and they're aware of it. They are very thankful for your photos online, on Twitter, on Instagram, wherever you're putting them, of figures that have come out yellowing. It's actually helped the design team identify which plastics are doing it, because different plastics are used on different pieces of toys. And since the designers have a much more intimate knowledge of the types of plastic used for each individual piece within a tooling or within a set of toolings, it's big help when you provide photos. So that's one that they are looking into. They also mentioned that Hasbro, as a standard for their factories overseas, has a special UV coating that is given to all of their plastics across all of their lines. And one of the things they kind of pointed out, without like selling out a specific factory, is that sometimes newer factories that they employ take a little while to get up to speed with their standards and quality. So was kind of like throwing a factory under the bus, but they didn't hit it too hard. The upside here, for those of us who are worried about yellowing figures, especially with some all-white figures coming out, like Cybertron, Metroplex, and like Star Saber, where you're putting in almost $200 for the figure, and it better not be yellowed within the first few years of owning it. I think what you have here is a conceit by Hasbro that they're going to do better, and I think that is the important part. So let's knock wood that it happened in time. We caught it in time, and see what happens moving forward. Next question came from the folks at Allspark, asking about Legacy Blitzwing, and can the turret on Blitzwing spin all the way around? And the answer there was yes, it can. In fact, Mark Marr, the designer that everybody knows and loves from Hasbro, had one on hand and spun it around for us. Gave us a little view of Blitzwing and the figure being spun 360. I think I'm trying to remember if I posted a picture of it on my Twitter account. I don't think I have. Another interesting note here is that Lenny Panzica worked on Blitzwing before transitioning out to G.I. Joe. Now, Lenny took over for John Warden when he left the line. So it's interesting to see where some of these toys were designed in the scheme of things. So, John Warden left the line about 1.5 years ago. Lenny was not on the line all that long as lead designer. He's, to my knowledge, he'd worked on the line before, but before fully transitioning over to G.I. Joe, I think he was kind of just a stopgap for a little while. And it's neat to know that Lenny was the one who was kind of the guy behind Blitzwing here. Now, the next question came from Anthony Cars from, he's a YouTube influencer, I believe, a reviewer. He's Sunstreaker84 on Twitter. And he said he wanted to know how they chose the characters for Legacy. Now, apparently, according to the designers, weeks are spent in advance of any line that they do on what they call the line plan. Many factors go into this decision. They're trying to strike a balance, and balance is a mix of character traits, character gender, color, alt mode. Does the character need an update? Is the character one of those ones the designer is trying to push through because they just like the character? Budgeting, weight, mass, these all play a factor in the character choices. So if you're wondering why certain characters have or haven't gotten an update, or why some characters are paired off in a way, I think that is a good place to start looking. One of the things, I think it came out later part of the conversation while we were talking, is that the way weight is distributed through a caseload, right? You may have 4 characters in a wave that are part of a deluxe series case. But you may get one that's really big and one that's kind of small. You may get the Cliff Jumper mold from Siege, or you may get the Ironhide mold from Siege. And the reason they ship together is, on average, they weigh a certain amount together. And some of that weight, to make some of the bulkier characters fit into certain price points, the weight has to be shifted throughout the case. So sometimes that's how come you'll see and it actually benefits female characters in a way, because of the smaller build of a lot of the female characters, that weight is then shifted to another character in the wave. So you may feel like, oh, well, I'm not getting my $20, $23, $25 worth of figure from this particular character. But there may be another character in that wave that you might be getting more value from, more than what you're paying. So it's supposed to balance out across the wave. We'll get into pricing later, because that's one that didn't quite sit well with me overall. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, so the next question came from the folks at TFW 2005. Want to know the thought process behind choosing Cybertron Metroplex as the next Titan. This team picked up Metroplex from the previous design team. In fact, John Wharton had a heavy hand in picking this Metroplex figure and part of the design. That actually came out in some later conversation. The ties for this are into the legacy story theme of mining Energon, so they wanted something that was a mining vehicle. We find out that Metroplex is 22 inches tall, and that the story was the initial driver for Metroplex in there. They reminded us that ultimately they're still designing these toys for children, even though, which is funny because they mentioned the age range of 11 to 14, and this figure is most certainly 15 and up on the packaging. But overall, I think, Metroplex is a good choice. There's not a lot of figures you can do at this Titan class. I don't mind there being another Metroplex Cybertron figure. Here's the other thing that they're not saying that I think we all need to remember as Transformers fans is that every so often they've got to reuse these names. It's hard for them to put out a giant G1 Metroplex every few years. Now, that might have been a good concept to do here also. I'm not arguing that. But for them to keep the name Metroplex, they've got to use the name Metroplex. So I think this is a good way to keep that name for a little longer. And then if they want to decide or feel there's a reaction enough to do another Titan scale G1 Metroplex more in the style of the original, they'll go down that road later. But that's not one of those things they're going to tell us on one of these calls, right? That's something we kind of have to piece together as fans. Now, the next question was whether or not they were surprised about the fan reaction for Wave 2. And the thing we got from the Hasbro team here overall is, one, that the pre-order numbers for Wave 2 crushed pre-order numbers for, I think, Kingdom Wave 2 or the whatever wave was announced 1 year ago at this time. They were surprised at some of the lesser-known characters selling really well, even the ones that are currently hitting stores now, particularly Bulkhead was a good example that of a toy that's selling really well despite the online reactions early on. As you'll find out if you're a Patreon later on, I really do like the Bulkhead toy. It's nice. So I think the upside there is that, the Hasbro is seeing success in characters that are not straight up G1. And that's good for us as fans, because now we can start treading those waters of it doesn't have to be Prime and Bumblebee and Starscream and Megatron and Grimlock and Shockwave all the time, and Soundwave. Now, next question came from Ben at BWF. Heard him here on the show before. And I got to say, having Ben on these calls really makes me miss going to conventions and doing these things in person, because Ben's kind of my press conference buddy whenever we do one of these. Will there be another price bump next year? And talking a little bit about price increases. And I think this comes on the heels of an article that came out the day before about Hasbro saying they will need to increase prices line-wide. This is not just Transformers, but this is going to hit Marvel and Star Wars first. Rumor has it they're going to go up to $27.99 for a deluxe figure. But the Hasbro team wasn't going to commit to that on this call, but they said going forward, deluxe prices for Transformers are $24.99. They also noted that cardboard prices are going up as well. They said that Amazon currently owns like all the cardboard in the world. And so their demand for cardboard has made it harder to get cardboard. You have to factor all these price increases onto a couple of things. Just my take on it. My take is, yes, it's the increase in price of cardboard. It's the increase in the cost of plastic, which is tied to the increase in cost in oil. That's not necessarily, you're like, oh, well, Hasbro's an American company. They're in the United States. Yeah, but they manufacture in Asia. And the war in the Ukraine is a reason partially of why there are some oil increases around the world. But Remember, Ukraine supplies oil for parts of Europe and Asia. So if Hasbro is manufacturing, say, in Vietnam, and Vietnam gets their oil from Ukraine, then there's an issue, right? Because now they're having trouble getting oil, and prices from other sources are probably going up, which means then raw materials prices go up, manufacturing prices go up. Cap that with shipping container prices going up around the world due to the pandemic and the effects of that, and then just inflation and everything else overall. You see where this is going, right? Everything leads to price increases. So it's going to be a while before they flatten out, and it kind of sucks. Actually, I'm going to tell you this. It really sucks. I mean, look, it sucks because there's nothing we as fans can do about it, right? Except not buy stuff, and that's fine, or be more picky in our purchases, which is also fine and good practice overall. But as someone who got into this hobby because it was fun and relatively cheap when I was 18 and didn't have a lot of money, didn't have a well-paying job, and I still could go, hey, Transformer Basics are $5. Transformer Deluxes are $10. The Megas were $15, and the most expensive toys in the line were $20. Then if I could scrape together $300, I could basically own an entire line and enjoy it. And not miss a figure over the course of a year. That was a big deal for me, and part of really what led me into being a lifelong collector, right? I think the other issue is the timing of price increases. I think really the hardest part of all this is that until 2012, we sat at $10 for deluxes for years, since I started in this hobby in 1996. So from 1996 to 2012, it was a $9.99 deluxe or maybe a $10.99 deluxe, depending on the store you're at. That year, they went up to $12.99. A year or two later, they went up to $14.99 per deluxe. And I remember going, I remember skipping waves. I remember skipping waves of Fall of Cybertron because I was like, the price increase kind of stinks. Like, I can't do this. I can't be into this the way I used to be. And I probably paid for it on the back end buying those figures on the secondhand market, but that was 10 years ago. So you're talking from 96 to 2012. So that's what, 4 and then 12 more years. That's 16 years without a price increase, right? By my estimation. And look, your mileage may vary, right? 16 years without a price increase. We have since almost tripled that price increase. We have gone up to $20 in deluxe, and by now, because I just purchased Cliff Jumper off of Hasbro Pulse for $24.99, we have gone 2.5 times that in less than 10 years, in just about 10 years. That's a lot. That's a lot from no increases in 14 years to 150% markup in 10 years. And so that trend upward is dangerous. It's got to flatten out for Hasbro and for Transformer collectors, or quite honestly, this hobby will die, or this this brand will suffer at it, because you will not be able to bring new blood into the hobby. But enough about that. Let's go on to some more pleasant questions and pleasant thoughts. Matt Thomas, actually, that's the person from the UK, who I believe is in the UK. I don't know where he's from in terms of website or YouTube channel or what. He had a question about Soundwave in Legacy and why Siege and not Netflix. And this is a really important answer for a lot of things. So it turns out the Earthrise Soundwave mold, being part of that Netflix line, is exclusive to Walmart and that Netflix capsule. Now, Walmart can choose to rerun that toy, but Walmart has exclusive rights to that particular mold, that Earthrise Soundwave tooling, for a period of time. So until that period of time expires, Hasbro can't run it in mainline. So they have to run it in some sort of Walmart line, which means they got to get Walmart and their people to sign off on doing Soundwave. And I imagine that extends to Laserbeak and Buzzsaw, meaning that we've done the Earth mode Laserbeak in that line, and they can't do Buzzsaw until either Walmart does it or Walmart lets the time expire on that mold. And a good example of this actually is the Earthrise Ironhide Ratchet mold, right? That was an Amazon thing. Amazon ran 1, 2, 3 different versions. Well, they ran 2 versions of it, right? No, they ran 3 versions of it. They ran it as Ratchet, they ran it as Ironhide in the Prowl package, and they ran it as Shattered Glass Ratchet, right? But at some point, it became DK2 Guard for selects, and that's not an Amazon exclusive. So at some point, that time ran out on that mold for Amazon, and they did not re-up, or it just, that's the clause. And so I think you'll see an ER Soundwave come out eventually, just not anytime soon, at least not until Walmart has their contract expire on that figure. Next question came from YouTuber Rodimus Primal. He asked about open packaging and people stealing heads off of Legacy Blue Streak and preventative measures in process. There is no changes anytime soon to return to old plastic bubble or cover the heads in a way that they don't come off. Maybe closed box in the future, but there's no immediate solutions. And one of the interesting pieces that came out here is that open box toys where kids can see the figure inside and see and touch it, sell better to kids. So that's what they have chosen for Transformers versus their other Hasbro lines aimed at older fans. Next question came from Wesley Dixon. You may know him from Unicron.com and his Instagram feed. West asked about Menasor and if he's Combiner Wars compatible. This was a big question. This was actually my question that I was going to ask if it was my turn. And he said they found out that they do fit, but they're not intended to fit. So it turns out they're kind of fit into those slots, but they don't really stay secure. So you can, and it only works on the legs of Menasor. So you could swap out Menasor's legs for Combiner Wars limb legs, but those guys are not going to stay on too well. You can pose them a little bit, but if you try to move them around, they're going to just flop right out. There's no ARM port compatibility with those. Mark's thoughts were that either he was trying to design a figure, whether or not it was a good figure overall, or wanted to make sacrifices to make it a Combiner Wars compatible figure. So he went with the better figure overall. Next question came from Ryan over at Cybertron.com, and he asked about Legacy Skywarp and his weapon, and whether or not his arm cannons, and I will say arm cannons, are coming in any shape or form. And we kind of got a non-answer here. So we got a no comment. We got an anything is possible. I think a weapons pack is on the horizon down the line. It's definitely on their radar, but it's something they cannot confirm nor deny. That usually means they've got something planned. I like the idea of a weapons pack. I liked when they did it in Siege. I like when they did it in Kingdom with the Blast Effects pack. I will like it when they do it in Legacy. Now, next question. Next question came from Vangelis over at W2F at TFW podcast, and of course from YouTube. And this was a bit of a long question. I found it funny because I was like, I would type my notes and get ready to hit send, and then the question would pivot and kind of not be about what I was already typing. So he had asked about started talking about female characters, then ended up into designer posts. So ultimately, this question took a while before it landed where it was going. And I'm not really sure there was a question mark at the end of it, but the designers talked a bit about posting their designs on Instagram. They don't post on Twitter, but if you're on Instagram, you should check out Mark and Sam and Evan. They post some of their drawings, and you can kind of see how some of these toys come together. And apparently the designers all love doing this, but there's nothing planned, like make a book out of these images or anything along those lines. And you can see also here that the conversation tends to meander a little. The topics don't necessarily stay on, say, Legacy Wave 2 as we were instructed, but we can't really necessarily, as people asking questions, jump outside of that right away. Sometimes you have to be creative in finding ways to get them to talk about other things within the framework of whatever the topic is that day. So on to question number 13, and this came from Brian Kilby at Radio Free Cybertron. And Brian wants to know the inspiration for G-Axis and how that ended up, how it was. And Mark had a bunch of great stuff with this one. So he mentioned working on the Thrilling 30 figure that came out a few years prior. Well, I guess it's almost 10 years now. It's getting close to it. 8 years ago. That was a redeco of Thrilling 30 Armada Starscream. So it didn't really physically look like G-Axis other than having that version drawn into the comics. And it took its color inspiration from the RID 2001 KB exclusive toy of G-Axis. So it also didn't really have a color match to the comic book. Mark's been wanting to do one of these G2 G-Axis figures for a while. And back when they did the Thrilling 31, there was a push towards brighter colors in the line, so that's why they went with the RID-01 color scheme. Mark does love this character, even owns some Manny Galen art of G-Axis, and held up a photo of it, and I held up the art, and I took a screen cap of it, posted it on Twitter. You can check it out there at TFU.INFO. He worked with Yu-San on this, who also happens to love G-Axis. The toy has hand articulation, and there was some back and forth about whether or not this could be retooled or recolored into Machine Wars Starscream, but it turns out that Mark also loves Machine Wars and brings it up every time they do toy pitch for whatever the next toy line is. One last thing that's added on here, the PR team is working to get a figure of G-Axis to the character's creators, Derek Yannicker and Simon Furman. So that's all really, really cool stuff. Now, on to question 14, my question. And it shows you, when we're on to question 14, this is 14 different people asking questions, no repeats, right? And mine was about Metroplex. And the question I had is noticing off a bulkhead, legacy bulkhead, that the figure had both 5mm ports and 3mm ports and some Powerlinks style ports. If there was any sort of consideration in Metroplex to make him adaptable to Cybertron figures, so like a key port or or more Powerlinks ports, and then two, if this was something they were planning to do across the line. The answer we got was one, that it was more incidental than anything, though. However, Metroplex does have the Omega Supreme style road connectors from I guess Omega was Earthrise. So the road connectors they've been using since, I guess, to switch over to Siege will work with Metroplex. Keys and minicons are not included, and some conversation then was had about whether or not drill bit was going to be included. And apparently, drill bit was part of the concept early on. And again, this is one of those concepts that originally existed under John Warden. So this shows you how far back they were already working on Cybertron Metroplex. The cost to add in drill bit costed out in the process pretty early, according to the team, which is interesting because the figure has jumped so much in price in terms of retail price to almost $200 for the figure from a figure that was, a size class that was 150 just a few years back, and tended to have more than just the Titan. And it usually had a deluxe class figure. To have some sort of core class version of drill bit apparently did cost out early on. So I don't know where early on is, but it's certainly was a consideration beforehand. They didn't rule out the idea that drill bit could be included as a core class figure later on in the line. Now on to the next question, question number 15. This came from Kevin Lucas over at Unicron.com. And Kevin wanted to know about the Rise of the Beast delay, if that was going to affect the number of toys in 2022, or things shifted earlier. Is some of the Rise of the Beast stuff coming out early? And oddly enough, the delay in Rise of the Beast had no impact on Legacy or Generations, because none of those characters appear in it, and also had no impact on Studio Series. The plan was pretty much to have those figures come out later on after the movie had already come out. So the Studio Series line is pretty much right on time in terms of Rise of the Beast. And they offered no comment on the Rise of the Beast Optimus that's now in Cyberverse. Quick tack-on question from Kevin there. Did want to know about the return to live conventions and meeting up. Hasbro is looking into it. They did mention New York Toy Fair and New York Comic Con, which are now on consecutive weeks. So that might be a place where they would do things where they can be at one and then be at the other directly after that. Having not lived in New York now for over a year, it's kind of a bummer that those are 2 consecutive weeks. You go from New York Toy Fair and then the following weekend is New York Comic Con. Also means that there's really nothing new to announce in terms of product or in terms of Transformers, because they used to be over 6 months apart. So New York Toy Fair would be in February and Comic Con would be in October. So you would be able to kind of jump 6 months ahead in the product line. Now on to question number 16. This came from my buddy Monzo over at TF.Wiki. Wanted to know the story behind the combining sword in core class. And apparently this was designed to help kids collect. It was an added bonus feature. It wasn't necessarily meant to be the main feature of the toy, but it was a bonus for collecting all 3 core class figures. Something you may miss because the packaging callouts are only on the legacy version. So if you have a Kingdom version of Hot Rod, that might be lost in the packaging. Now, the way the weapons are designed, I should say, they're all meant to combine in one big kind of play pattern. So you can make multiple different style weapons from all the different Energon weapons across Legacy. So it's meant to kind of replace the weaponizers, fossilizers play pattern from the previous 3 lines. And quick note here on a kind of a side tangent, we kind of started talking about QR codes and bios. So the QR codes that lead to the character bios that are now part of Legacy, if you've used any of them, and if you've just saved the image off the internet and then used your smart device to take you there, you'll notice that the bios are incredibly short. They're about 1 sentence, and at that, there may be 5 words, and usually 1 or 2 of those are the character name. The reason they're so short is that they have to translate those into 27 different languages, and paying for translation is by the word. As someone who has had to go and contract people to pay for transcription, I don't have to pay for translation, but even transcription gets expensive by the word or by the minute. So I get what they're saying here is that translating into 27 languages means 27 times whatever that dollar amount is. So yeah, let's do the quick math. For every $100 they have to pay someone to translate, that's $2,700 they have to pay someone to translate. Though, quick note about the QR codes. If you're worried about keeping the packaging, or if you want to recycle your packaging, the QR codes are printed on the instructions for the Legacy figures, so you still have them archived there. And of course, when I get around to adding these into TFU.INFO, any information from those QR codes, so I may not be able to lift the images, but as far as the text and the text spec ratings go, we'll record those over at TFU.INFO, as we always have. And that was actually the last question of the first round. Then, by accident, Jeremy from Transmissions was asked again if he wanted to ask a question, because he had repopped into the queue the way Zoom had laid out people's faces, so they thought they hadn't gotten to him. So he did ask a quick question about Shattered Glass Ultra Magnus. Once again, John Warden had planned the skull head for this figure before they decided to do both heads, and the comic that comes with it will be the first issue of the new Shattered Glass miniseries. So I guess that makes the final Shattered Glass miniseries the final series of Transformers books published by IDW. Interesting. After that, it became kind of a free-form conversation. We had a couple things we talked about. We talked about Tarantulas, Legacy Tarantulas, and how he is not a retool of Black Arachne. In fact, the only part he shares is the gun. So they ported over the accessory. Other than that, everything on him is new. The team does talk a lot about transmetals because we've made it known that we all would like to see them again. It turns out vac metal is harder and harder to do these days, and finding the right process to give the toys the right look is kind of the holdup in there. The general consensus on the call is that as far as the fan sites go, and I think we're representative of the fandom at large in a lot of ways, all 17 of us or 16 of us that got to ask questions, I don't think one person said they would want Vac Metal over just an alternative that looked really good. Of course, there are some potential retools for Motormaster. They haven't really said, but Evan has something cooking. Sam played a lot with Metroplex and showed us, because he had the sample, showed us a lot of stuff. The alternate side of his head is designed to be wearing a welding mask. The wheel on his weapon does not open up, and it was not confirmed whether or not the Galaxy Force Optimus Prime can hold it. They haven't tried it out. The wheel does have a ratcheted spin, and it's very loud, which is pretty cool. Menasor has the 2 arm blasters molded into his wrists, the ones you see in Masquerade.
Real Menasor has special powers. Yes, powers to destroy!
And yes, Metroplex does take some blast effects, and I was able to get a screen grab of those ramp connector ports on his legs. We shifted a little bit to some other things. Mark worked on BotBots, some of the Series 6 stuff, like the pizza race car that's coming out. And then we got into one final question, and that was from me about the Legacy Stunticons. And the way Dragstrip is designed to fit as an arm, he can split into an upper and a lower half, back half of a car, top half of a car. And I'd thrown the idea out there, if this was part of their design thinking on the line, that now they can make figures that they can keep the front half and tool a whole new lower half, or vice versa. And they, if that's how the design thinking for the line is going to be going forward. And they seemed a little surprised and very intrigued by that notion. I don't think they thought of it that way, but they were really into the idea that they could do other toolings off of keeping the front of a car and changing the back of the car, almost in a way like I guess Micromaster combiners come to mind. But I think I sparked some imagination in those designers with that question. So we'll see how that goes forward. But no, they're not designed with that in mind, with future toolings in mind. They were simply designed that way to do the arm articulation on Menasor. And so with that, if you are one of my Patreon students over at patreon.com/TFU.INFO, we're going to talk a little bit about the Legacy figures and my thoughts on them so far. And for those of you listening for free out on iTunes and everywhere else, check this out. Hey, want to help out this podcast or the website TFU.INFO? There's a number of ways you can do it. Let me tell you how. You can help us directly by joining our Patreon and enrolling as a student at Transformers University. There, you'll get early access to the podcast as well as exclusive behind-the-scenes peeks and perks for as little as $1 a month. Sign up is quick and easy. Just swing on by to www.patreon.com/TFU.INFO. Another way you can help us is by using our Amazon link, www.tfu.info/Amazon. Type that into your browser whenever you want to shop at Amazon, and a portion of what you spend will be contributed back to us. It's that easy. Finally, you don't become the world's longest running transforming toy archive without some help from other fans. We're always on the hunt for photos of figures and accessories we're missing from our pages. If you'd like to contribute, go to tfu.info/help for a list of what we need, or send an email to info@tfu.info. tfu.info, the Alpha Trion and Omega Prime of transforming toys. Now, back to the show. And once again, I want to thank you for joining TFU News and Views. I am your host, Anthony Bricali, owner-operator, madman behind TFU.info, website, toy archive, Transformers University podcast, this podcast, and oh so much more. Till next time. See you. Want to be on the show? Leave us a voicemail at 702-763-4838. That's 702-POD-4TFU. Or send an email to info@tfu.info. Be sure to catch us on Twitter at TFU_info and on Facebook and Instagram under the username TFU.INFO, all one word. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TFU.INFO, where we post all of our podcasts, plus special video segments, reviews, and live coverage of Transformers-related events such as New York Toy Fair and New York Comic-Con. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please visit us at www.tfu.info, the world's longest-running transforming toy archive.